Well, we seem to have a lively crowd this evening, so let's see if we can redirect some of that energy toward our lesson tonight. Appreciate everybody being here on this chilly evening. Appreciate Brother Cody filling in for me Sunday. I'm sure you guys had a great class. I've watched part of it, but I haven't gotten through all of it yet. So, talked about Thanksgiving, which is kind of, I like how that transitioned from our previous lesson. And certainly Thanksgiving is a big part of how we need to approach God in worship. And we're continuing to discuss in this first third of the book how we approach God. And just to kind of reiterate that lesson and maybe a little bit of a segue into this lesson. The second question there in the previous lesson, how do you find gratitude for God when things aren't going well? How do you find gratitude for God when things aren't going well?
Think of the things that are.
Pardon?
Think of the things that are.
Okay. And in parentheses there it says, be specific.
I'm still breathing.
Okay. Go ahead.
I have a friend who lost her son right before he turned 3 a couple of years ago, and when I went to visit her and her husband, we were talking about church, and they're denominational, but I kind of asked them that, like, how are you able to go worship during this time? Like, I can't even imagine. And her husband's response was, well, I can either run away from God right now or get even closer to God. And I just thought that was a really good perspective to have. Like, I can either run from God, or I can just cling to Him even more. And so I know, like, gratefulness and rejoicing wasn't really on their agenda at that point, but the fact that they had that attitude of, we're going to talk to God more, we're going to go to Him more, we're going to go to worship and not run from this, was, I thought, just really strong.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is the choice that we all face in difficult times is, where are we going to put our faith? Where are we going to put our hope? And, even at times when it's difficult, I think when we're honest about what our choices really are, our choices between something that is everlasting, something that is bigger and greater than our comprehension, or we can choose anything less than that. And, when we weigh that in the balance, there's really only one reasonable way to answer that question. Any other thoughts about that?
I think somebody says count your blessings.
Yep.
There's no Bing Crosby song.
That's exactly what I wrote down here. I said, count your blessings, and they will always outnumber your trials. And so that's the thing that's difficult for us a lot of times is, we're focused on the here and the now. We're focused on the present difficulty. But we've got to remind ourselves that, hey, God has already won the victory, right? That is what we have to focus on, is the fact that God has already won the victory. God has already promised us something better, something greater than this world, this life, this body, however you want to frame it. And so, the choice there is can I focus on that? Can I focus on more than me and now, and give God the praise that He deserves? And in order to give God the praise that He deserves, one of the things we have to do is we have to sing. And singing is such a unique thing, especially in the context of the church and of worship, because there's really nothing else that we all do simultaneously and we can do it with pretty wild variations in talent and skill, but we can all join in and make, as the psalmist describes, a joyful noise. And that is such a powerful thing and such a magnificent gift that God has given us. Music, I love music in general, but having the ability to gather with God's people and to sing songs of praise, to sing songs of encouragement, it's just an amazing thing. So let's turn over to Psalm 100. And we're going to, if somebody would read that for us, we'll start talking about what it means to come into His presence with singing. Psalm 100. And if you would, just go ahead and read Psalm 100.
Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into His presence with singing. Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who made us, and we are His. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. Enter His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him, bless His name. For the Lord is good, His steadfast love endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations.
Okay, thank you. Just a beautiful psalm here, and of course, a psalm this is a song. If we spoke Hebrew, we could probably sing this. I'd say it'd be pretty rough in English. It probably wouldn't rhyme very well. I don't think it's quite an iambic pentameter, but I'm sure this would be very singable in Hebrew, and that was probably what was done with it in past centuries. But it makes some very powerful points here and commands, and helps us understand what it is we're doing when we sing to God. The first stanza there, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. So there's right away, there's a great point, there's a great lesson there that singing to God is not something that is reserved exclusively for one group or another. This is something that God wants from all the earth. And it's something that God is worthy of. All the earth should be singing praise and glory to God for our very existence. Understanding that God is our creator. It says, serve the Lord with gladness and come into His presence with singing. And again there, that idea of coming into His presence is emphasized. That when we come to worship God, when we're coming to sing songs, we're not just singing to each other. We're not just reverberating the walls of this building. We are standing before the throne of God to sing praise. We are not the audience of worship. And that's something that I think so many times we fail to understand, is that we are not the audience. God is. God is the one who we are singing to. And certainly we'll get into, it kind of goes both ways, but we need to first and foremost understand that we are singing songs of praise to the King of Kings, to the Lord of Lords, to the Creator of heaven and earth. Yes. Were you raising your hand?
Not yet.
We'll call a balk if you... So we need to consider that when we come before the Lord. And, it's not exclusive. It's something that God demands of all of us. And we do that with the understanding that He is the one who made us. And in this second stanza here, he's talking about possession here. It says, He is who made us and we are His. We are His people and the sheep of His pasture. God is not our possession. God is not something that, we have control over, possession of. We are God's possession. We are the created, and He is the creator. And so as such, that relationship is that we give him the praise and honor and glory. But I love what comes after that, because it says, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. What does that phrase indicate to you? What does this little stanza here, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise, what does that indicate to you?
You need to be prepared before you come in.
Okay. There's certainly, absolutely, I think that's a great point there is we need to prepare ourselves and we need to prepare our hearts. You know, a lot of that previous lesson is kind of about our attitudes and, you know, the way we approach God, and certainly with praise and thanksgiving is a big part of that. But I think this idea of entering his gates and his courts, I think there's some implication there that, you know, we are privileged to have access to his gates and his courts, to be able to come before him at all and do that. I think we really need to consider that, you know, we're coming into his presence and we're very privileged to do that, you know, and you can get into the whole thing with the old temple and the veil and how that was torn in two at Jesus' death, and I think that's certainly important. But just thinking about the fact that we have the ability to approach God in worship and to know that he is listening and that he hears us and that, you know, he is receiving our worship, that in and of itself is a privilege and should cause us to be thankful. And give thanks to his name, bless his name, for the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. And that last part there, you know, that's a declaration, and it's also a promise that, you know, it's declaring the goodness of God and his steadfast love and reminding us of his faithfulness, and that all the promises that he has made throughout all generations have been right and true, and they will continue to be so. So the God that we are praising is one who does what he says he's going to do, and we can have faith and we can have hope in that.
Something you open with, I think about verse 4 there. You know, it's easy to carry all the stuff that we all have on our minds in here.
Yep.
We all do it because we're human. You know?
Yep.
But you can just for a moment forget that stuff, as hard as it may be, you know, and just be grateful, count your blessings, you know, like I said.
Yeah. And, you know, we kind of talked about that in a prior lesson. It's not that we have to, you know, we don't have that Men in Black thing that we can just blank our minds out. We can carry those things before God, the things that are important. Now, you know, we need to leave the silly stuff behind, but there are things on our heart, there are things that are weighing on us, there are things that we're concerned about, you know, the real things that God is concerned about, those things too. And he wants us to use this time of praise and of worship to help us understand that he's working on it. He understands and he's dealing with it. And hopefully through that, through the encouragement we receive by worshiping with our brethren and singing these songs of reminder of the things that God has done and the things that he's promised he will do, you know, that should help us alleviate those concerns and those worries and help us put our faith and our trust in him. Absolutely. And you know, to your point earlier, it's an opportunity for us to draw closer to God rather than being distant from him.
When I was reading the lesson, I was thinking of Avery and singing. He enjoys his singing so much, and the kids when they're in class. This is some of the first worship like stuff that they get to be involved in.
Absolutely.
And it sticks to them because even though they're child songs, my God is so big, so strong, and so mighty. I mean, that hits with me deeply. Mm-hmm. But it also does them too, because they get to realize, you know, the movement sometimes for kids, mm-hmm. It is what connects them at their level.
Absolutely. And that's a huge part of why it's so important that we teach our kids and we bring them to worship and we get them involved at that age, because that's where that heart, that's where that faith is being built from a young age.
I think he mentioned somewhere in here something about the ABCs, and you learn it from singing. And I think God in His wisdom knew there's a connection there. There just seems to be something that sticks with you when it's put to a melody or it's put to something. And so, because I think he also mentioned, you can recollect, verses from a hymn that can speak to you in different times, or these psalms, or so I just think that God knew there's something with that, and I think it's by design.
Absolutely. If you want to know how something works, ask the designer.
Yeah.
And the things that he gave us are certainly for our benefit. And I think I'm sure you could find a zillion scientific research papers about all that kind of thing, with a whole lot of stuff about neurons and all that kind of stuff. But it all comes back to that's the way he made us. And he made us to learn from those kinds of things and the repetition of it and all that. Absolutely.
Just sort of an aside to what you all are talking about. I heard a guy once, Christian man, debating with an atheist, and he brought this point up. What about music? Why does music move us if there's no creator? The atheist would say that it's just a human construct. But, we, as Christians, we believe, that, that's something that's given to us by God. We don't understand exactly why it triggers the emotions it does in us, but, it's a beautiful thing that He's given us, music.
Absolutely. And I think, through wisdom and experience, and we understand, there's an emotional piece of it. Natalie and I went to a concert Saturday night, and, there's some of that in that. You have some of that experience, and you're in a group of people, and everybody's singing along and all that kind of thing. It's fun. It's a nice experience. But it's not like this. It's shallow, because there's a depth and a meaning and an understanding and a spiritual importance to what we're singing out here, and whether it's out here or in somebody's home or at a funeral or out in the woods. It doesn't matter. There's a difference and there's an importance to it. And so, we have to discern the difference in those emotional elements of it, which are valuable in their own right, and the spiritual aspect of it. And I think knowledge is the difference. Yeah, absolutely. Somebody else have a hand up? Okay. So, let's talk about this idea of a joyful noise. And I thought this is really interesting. We've repeated this phrase from this psalm for a lot, but I'd never really dug down to the word there. It says joyful noise comes from the Hebrew word ruah. We're going to pretend that that's how you say it. Although joyful noise only occurs 6 times in the ESV, exclusively in Psalm 95, 98, and 100, the Hebrew word ruah is much more prevalent, appearing in over 40 different verses. That's because the word didn't only mean a shout or noise made for joy, it also meant a noise made for victory, appearing most famously in Joshua 6, when God toppled the walls of Jericho using the ruah of the people. So I thought that was a really interesting connection, between this idea of joy and victory, and that word has both of those connotations to it. And we sing songs like "Faith is the Victory." We sing about God's victory, and our kids even sing songs about Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, and we understand the victoriousness of God, and that should be a source of our joy. That should be a source of why we want to praise God in singing is because our God is a victorious God. And as I said earlier, He has won the victory already through Jesus. He has fought that battle with sin and death for us, just as He did with the people there against Jericho. And all He's asking for is our obedient faith. Why did the walls of Jericho fall down? Was it because they made this particular vibrational frequency that caused there was some kind of flaw in the chemical structure that bonded the rocks together in the walls of Jericho that responded to this? I'm sure you can find somebody who will try to make that argument. I think I've seen it somewhere.
I thought it was an earthquake.
You think it was an earthquake? It may have been. It may have been.
They say a troop of marching soldiers can make a bridge fall.
Absolutely. I mean, why do soldiers march in time on certain kinds of bridges?
So it don't fall down.
Huh?
So it don't fall down.
Exactly. On like I guess like a suspension bridge, a swinging bridge or something. Yeah, you can cause things like that. But that's not what was going on here. People who try to make that argument are nuts. What happened here is that God won the victory. What happened here is that the people were obedient to what God commanded, and He knocked the wall down. And He did the same thing for us. He's already knocked the wall down, and He's asking for us to be obedient to Him. And so we need to be mindful of that when we sing songs of praise to God.
Yeah, Hebrews 11:30. By faith, the walls of Jericho, after they had been circled for 7 days, fell down. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. So singing praise to God is very much a proclamation of faith in Him. Because otherwise, what is the point? I mean, we can sing these songs the same as we can sing, the top 40 country hits. But one of them has salvation in it, and the other one is just weird these days. But it needs to be the kind of thing that fills our hearts with gladness, that fills our hearts with thanksgiving, and as Brandy talked about earlier, that teaches us, that fills our hearts and our minds and our spirits with things of God. When you think about the idea in the old law there about this constant teaching and talking about God and teaching it to your children and teaching it while you're walking and while you're doing all that you do, that needs to be part of our lives as well. And I think singing is a huge part of that. When we're at the grocery store and the kids bust out and a hymn from church, I think that's the greatest thing in the world. And you may never have any idea who that might encourage. It certainly encourages me, and I hope it does other people as well. And so that attitude of joy, that attitude of gratitude and thanksgiving is the kind of attitude that we need to have when we come to God. And, we don't start with, when somebody wants to be a Christian and they're baptized, we don't take them in the back and say, all right, so we got to explain how music works to you, because otherwise this is going to be a whole thing. No, we can work on that, and Tim would be glad to work with you on that. But it's much more important that you understand what you're singing and who you're singing to and why you're singing, why this joy is in your heart, why this gladness and gratitude is in your heart. And then you can worry about pitch and time and sharp notes and dotted eighths and all that kind of good stuff. And those things are great. And we definitely need to be doing everything we can, not only to give our best to God, but also to help one another. But if it only becomes an academic exercise to us, then we've really lost the plot.
Jonathan, why do you think that is in the church, that since that's so important, that you almost never hear songs explained and songs talked about and songs taught on?
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say almost never. I think sometimes, and you know, later in the book here, he mentions the song "Night with Ebon Pinion," and that's always one. Every time we sing, I've heard that explained 100 times,
I've had to look it up.
and every time we sing it, I think, what is that means again? I can't remember.
I think
Um,
I got to a point where I got tired of and several songs and looked it up.
And you know, sometimes that can be an issue, and I do think that's a very appropriate time for whoever's leading the song to say, okay, in case you've forgotten or you're not familiar, this is what this means.
Brooded over the
Right? Yeah. You know, if I had a nickel for every time I was brooded over the veil, I wouldn't be able to make a phone call. So that's a great point. And we shouldn't always assume that everybody understands, and that there's a lot of different ways we can go about that. And understanding is certainly a part of it. We'll get to that a little bit later. I want to talk about this idea that we see in Acts 16. Let's turn over there to Acts 16 and verses 25 and 26. So it's a story I think we're all very familiar with. It's the conversion of the Philippian jailer. And it says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. And it goes on, and we get the rest of the story there about the Philippian jailer. But I just want to focus on these two verses here. What song do you think Paul and Silas were singing? They didn't bring any books back here. I guess we could flip through and see if we can figure it out. But you think it was in our book?
How great thou art.
You think so? I'd say it's coming close to that.
In the King James.
Yeah. Probably somewhere in Psalms, maybe. I don't know. But what do you imagine they were singing about? Or maybe I should rephrase the question and say, what would you be singing about if you were in a Philippian jail? I don't know what the prison conditions were like in Philippi in this day and age. I'm guessing meager?
Probably no air conditioning.
Probably not. I'd say there was at least a bucket. What would you be singing about?
God's faithfulness or deliverance or just his presence. Definitely not something joyful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are great. Well, you named three things: deliverance,
Faithfulness.
faithfulness, and presence. I like that.
I should say this after.
Yeah, no, that's very good. You know, those are things that that we would definitely want to pray for in that circumstance. But to your point, they were probably weren't singing like real fast. I bet it wasn't an upbeat, little swinging kind of number, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was in a minor key, a little more somber.
Swing rope.
Yeah. So is that wrong? Is that wrong to not sing joyfully? No, I don't think so at all. I think they were singing faithfully, and they were singing in a way that not only was encouraging to themselves, but sounds like some other folks heard them and understood what they were singing about. So they were teaching and admonishing those around them. So singing is not always about, when we sing hymns at a memorial service, at a funeral, we're usually not grinning ear to ear while we're doing that, right? That's a very emotional and very trying thing, and yet we sing. Why do we sing in that time? Why do we sing in that moment?
I think James 5:13 says, "Is anyone among you suffering, let him praise. Anyone cheerful, let him sing praise." I mean, we can be celebrating that person's victory over death, that they've gone on to be with the Lord.
Mhm.
I don't think there'd be anything wrong with being
Not at all. No.
It's comforting. It's comfort for the family to hear words of spiritual words sung.
Yeah. It's a complex emotion because, as you said, we can say, the faithful Christian who has gone on to be with God, we absolutely celebrate that. At the same time, we're mourning because they're not with us. We're mourning our own situation more than theirs. But at the same time, we're edifying, we're admonishing one another that, hey, we got to keep running our race so we can be with them again. And encouraging those who are not of the faith that, hey, if you want to honor this person, live as they lived. If you want to be with them again, live as they lived. And understand their example. Natalie?
Oh, I tell stories all the time, but I can remember one particular evening, Wednesday night, after we had found out about being pregnant with Avery and had an issue, and we brought it here. And there was a song led, and that song, and being in the headspace that I was in, it let me know that everybody else, if I wasn't able to do it myself, everybody else in the auditorium was going to help us. And it was very encouraging.
And now how am I supposed to keep talking?
I'm sorry.
You brought up a point about encouraging in the jail. I would say singing in the jail, the occurrence would probably be pretty rare. Just like, I don't know how many kids you would see singing in a supermarket, just a lot of mine or whatever, so to your point, that can encourage, and obviously it did.
Yeah.
The jailer, and who knows who else in that moment, so.
Yeah. And my kid singing is way better than the Muzak at Kroger. So, they may not want me to do it, but
The writer says, sometimes singing is about hope.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that.
absolutely. And I can think of more than one occasion that I keep trying to think of how to work this into some kind of lesson, but I call it I've got a title for it. I just don't know what the rest of it is. Basically, it's in defense of the back pew, and that Wednesday evening she was talking about that's as far as we could go, and about 10 years ago, that back pew was about as far as I could limp on a Sunday morning, and it was far enough. But absolutely, singing with faithful people about a faithful God is pretty special, and it's certainly something that we should relish the ability and the opportunity to do. And certainly the example we see there of Paul and Silas in a difficult situation, but singing from an understanding of knowing who God is, not the circumstance. So often we focus on our circumstance rather than the things that we know about God, the things that we put our hope and our trust in, and letting our faith do the singing no matter what is going on in our lives, is very important. It's also really important for the church. Try to imagine, well, actually, all of us in this room don't have to try to imagine what it's like to have a Sunday morning where you did not get to gather with God's people and sing. You remember what that was like? About 5 years ago. I think for a lot of people, it was encouraging in a way, because you realized there was no taking it for granted anymore, right? You do the same thing over and over again, and you begin to take it for granted. But suddenly there was this really big void in your worship that, I don't care how big your TV is, I couldn't feel it. Could not feel it. Yeah. And I truly believe, and there were folks in that time that never came back to church. And I think that's because they were never here, for the most part, or they hadn't been for a long time. Because if you went through that time period and you went through that experience, and who knows, we could be back into it Sunday morning. I have no idea what's going to happen. We may be getting a reminder of it. I don't know. But if you went through that experience and you came back here and it didn't just hurt your heart for what you had missed, then I think we'd lost the plot prior to that. And so I certainly think that there was a lot of good and bad that came from that. But certainly I think the people who desired to be with God's people desired it even more. Singing is so beneficial to the body of the Lord, and it's so important to the way that we encourage and worship together. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19 and 20 says, well, let's back up to verse 18 actually, because it says, and do not get drunk with wine, for that is debauchery, but be filled with the Spirit, addressing one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody to the Lord with your heart, giving thanks always and for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Everything you see in this passage here is about unity. It's about the connection that the body of Christ should have in being filled with the Holy Spirit. It says addressing one another. Yes, we are. There's a verticality to our singing, in that we're singing to God. We are singing to the Most High and giving Him praise and honor and glory. But we are also encouraging and admonishing and edifying one another, because we all come here with different stuff every time we come. And some of us are really riding high and encouraged and motivated, and some of us are at rock bottom, and some of us are everywhere in between. But God gives us the ability to be unified in the understanding that wherever we're at, He's there with us. And He is meeting us in those challenges. He is meeting us in those difficulties. And He's meeting us in those joyful moments. And we are meeting one another in those moments to rejoice together, to grieve together. Whatever the need is, we do it together. And that idea there, submitting to one another, it's not a look at me kind of thing. It's not a me and my way kind of thing. It's us doing God's will. And so the church being unified in song and being unified in singing and praising God is a beautiful gift that God has given us. And again, one that we should absolutely not take for granted. So we got just, how much time we got left? We got about 4 minutes left. So how do we sing better?
Sing like you mean it.
Absolutely. That's
I think we bring in also the previous lessons, having Thanksgiving in our mind.
Mhm.
Remember what he is and what he did.
I always think of, kind of like the question I posed earlier, I always think of Paul saying in 1 Corinthians saying, I will sing with the Spirit, but I will sing with understanding. And I know you all will find this very hard to believe, but I never grew up in a very academic singing environment and didn't understand music very well. So for me, it's easy for me to get like, I'm barely reading the words a lot of times. I'm watching the notes to try to blend in with you guys because you're fantastic at it. But whenever I can force myself to look at the words and think about what they mean, it becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah, absolutely. And 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 15 says, what am I to do? I will pray with my spirit, but I will pray with my mind also. I will sing praise with my spirit, but I will sing with my mind also. That connection between the spiritual and our knowledge, we have to make those connections and it not just be an emotional thing and it not just be an academic thing. It's got to be using our knowledge of who God is and what He's done and everything that we owe to Him and allowing that to stir our hearts and to stir our spirits into real praise, into real worship. Yeah.
Something that I've been involved in at other congregations was, we talk about preparing for worship. Well, that's part of it as well. And part of that for some congregations is having a night of learning new songs, strictly for the purpose, so that you're not getting thrown upon a new song in service, and you're like, okay, what do I look at? The notes or the words? And so if you have that time, either by yourself, if we don't have something here, then that's part of preparing. You're preparing for the song worship part. Not just a Bible class, but you're also learning, looking at the words and putting them on your heart, thinking about them.
Absolutely. You got to prepare our hearts and our minds, but also our abilities. That's certainly an important thing.
There's a lot of times when I really didn't focus to really, follow the words and know what they mean what I'm singing. But when I really do that, it's hard. I get choked up. It's hard for me to get through. I don't know. Maybe it's getting old and emotional.
It's possible. It's possible.
I think it's true because a lot of times part of going through or have been through the birth of the song.
I'm going to say, if you've ever experienced a loss, the day of a service or a day close to service, I can't do it. I can't sing the song. I'm choked out. So I think it does have that connection. Right?
Absolutely. So we got to sing with the understanding. We got to sing like we mean it, as Tim said, and remember who we're singing to, and remember who we're singing with. We're singing to the God of heaven with His people, and if we let that be our focus, I think the technical stuff gets a lot easier when that's our focus. So thank you guys.